now it's still only like 40 degrees here. I'm up in the northeast of the US. Let's see, we've got Minneapolis, India, Washington, D.C., Minnesota, San Diego, Orange County, wow, Vancouver, people from all over. So really nice to see all of you. If you're just tuning in, we're going to get started here in a couple minutes. Quick housekeeping for you. At the bottom of the Zoom, you will see two different options to share some thoughts. You've got the chat window, and then you've also got Q&A. Q&A is the right place to go if you want to ask a question to our panelist, Pat. And I'll be keeping an eye on those Q&As and making sure that we flag them for him to answer as many as he can. The chat window is a really great place for you to really connect with your peers, kind of while this conversation is going on. You can ask and answer questions with one another in the chat. We're using the chat right now to talk a little bit about where everybody is from. I also encourage you to share a little bit about yourself in the chat right now, so you can tell us who you are, as well as what kind of role you're in right now, and if you have tried to implement the Pragmatic Framework successfully, or if you have not quite done it yet, or if you're just scoping it out and plan to do it soon. So encourage you to share a little bit of info in there, and you can start to get to know each other. Let's see, I see Redlands, California, Denver, Tampa, Fort Worth, Utah. You guys are all in places that are warmer than where I am. So I am going to stop looking at the chat now because I'm a little bit jealous in the space. But I do see some introductions from people starting to share more about who they are and how they're approaching this work right now. So encourage you to do the same. As you guys are hanging out together in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I'm really excited for this conversation today. We are talking to Pat Janaka-Nandhini, and Pat is a product executive with over 20 years of proven experience, and he really thrives in leading large-scale B2B products, and he's a huge proponent of change and adapting to change. And you can say that, but it's also really different once you get to know Pat and realize that he really is somebody that take this deeply to heart and is really skilled in making that happen. So right now he is bringing his skills as the Chief Product Officer at Eris Global. He's also Pragmatic alumni and a Pragmatic alumni community founder who has successfully implemented the Pragmatic Framework a number of times. So that's what we're going to talk about today. He brought with him 3 different case studies, mini case studies of how he implemented the Pragmatic Framework at 3 different companies. So he's going to show where each organization started, the approach he took to implementing his pragmatic training, and then all of the lessons learned from each individual experience. We'll also talk about some KPIs that he used to measure progress, and of course, those real-world tips and tricks that we all love so much. Pat, you can pop to the next slide for me. Thank you. For those that I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, it's nice to see you all. My name is Georgina Donahue. I am the Director of Community at the Pragmatic Alumni Community, which is where really we all hang out to share that really practical and tactical knowledge of how to make you an exceptional product professional. Like I mentioned, Pat is one of the founding members of the Pragmatic Alumni Community. We call it the PAC affectionately. So I encourage you, if you're an alumni, to join us. You can chat with Pat there further. But that's enough for now. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Pat, and thank you very much for being with us.
All right. Thank you very much for the kind words, Georgina. Hopefully people can hear me okay. I've got the chat window open. All right. Okay, good. Georgina is giving me the thumbs up. All right, so I want to get right into it. First off, thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to attend this session. And I also want to give a shout out to some of my former team members that are on this call, Paul and Cassidy. I only noticed those two names go by, but there's probably others as well. Big shout out to you guys, because all of this wouldn't have been possible without my former team members and my current team members as well. As much as I can sit here and talk about implementing Pragmatic, it's about people, not the framework. So with that, let me give you a brief background about myself. 20 years in software. I did there's a lot of people who've done this similar transition from engineering to product. I was a developer. I'm passionate about building great products. The last few years has been primarily focused on B2B and enterprise software. And just to give you a context of what I mean by enterprise software, typically deal sizes are over 100K. This is not the type of stuff that you put on your credit card. It's usually a PO and purchasing is involved and so on. So I'm implementing Pragmatic for the third time in my career. I've been at Autodesk for 11 years. That's who trained me on Pragmatic. Autodesk uses Pragmatic for a long time. I attended my original Pragmatic training at least 10 years ago, more than that, I think. But it's been super beneficial for me. I remember coming out of the training thinking, oh, this makes a lot of sense. This isn't rocket science. But I think the way that I position the Pragmatic framework is, yes, it's not rocket science, but it gives you a framework and a common language to think about. So that's a little bit about me. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the Pragmatic framework is, at least how I view it. Focuses your product on the market and takes an outward view. And you hear a lot about these nothing important happens in the office. Although right now it's probably nothing important happens in your home, given that everybody's working from home. But I think it's really important to take a outward customer-focused view on solving market problems. And the top left box there, the market problems, I almost wish that that box would be a little bit bigger, because that is the foundation of the Pragmatic marketing framework. And I also feel like that particular focus on market problem helps pave the way for a lot of the implementation that comes up afterwards. Because lots of companies that I've been in struggle with product market fit. And one of the reasons for that is because they tend to focus a lot on the features and not about what are you trying to solve for and why is that important. So what is it? It's a common language for your company. Typically, product management as a function isn't well defined, and depending on the organization, product management sometimes sits with engineering, sometimes it's with marketing, sometimes it might be in services. I've seen all these different models. Sometimes you have it independent, but it allows you to understand how are you going to align in your company and foster collaboration between the various functional groups. Easy way to assign roles and responsibility. That comes back to the earlier point about product management encompasses a lot. And if you look at the Pragmatic framework, the boxes that you see on their website, there's a lot going on in there, and there's no one individual that's going to be doing all of those activities. So this is a great way of assigning roles and responsibilities and aligning the organization so that you don't end up with double work. And the final piece that I'll say here is on the Pragmatic framework, it's a journey, not a destination. So when you say implement Pragmatic framework, it doesn't happen in 2 months. It doesn't happen in 3 months. It's an ongoing process. You're going to have attrition in your teams. You're going to have new people joining, and it's a constant evolution. And it's also your company is changing as well. So there's always room for improvement, always room for how do you improve on this. The next piece that I want to talk about is what it's not. It is not a silver bullet to fix product issues. It's not going to magically make your technical debt go away. It's not going to magically make your product market fit, get aligned. It will not fix organizational issues. If you've got an issue where the head of marketing doesn't talk to the head of services or to the head of product, it's not going to fix that. At the end of the day, it's not to address organizational issue, and it's not an overnight formula to turn around your product management team. I've seen numerous examples of product people getting asked or getting tapped on the shoulder by management saying, hey, come in, change your product management team. Oh, and you need you implement Pragmatic good overnight, right? And the answer is no, it's not. It's a long process. It takes time, but it's embedding a culture into the organization. Like Georgina mentioned, I'm going to talk about 3 mini case studies. And I'm going to give a little bit of background on all 3 of them. The first one was a PE-owned company, enterprise software, single product company. I had a small team of 5 people. And the second one went through a transition. So it's an enterprise software company again, but went from a private equity ownership to being acquired by a publicly listed company, and had a portfolio of different products in varying product lifecycle, and I had a large team there. And then the third one is also private equity backed enterprise software portfolio products. It's a very strong market fit. Company B, the product market fit wasn't always apparent in some of the products. Company C, that is very strong product market fit. So I'll go through these mini case studies. Each of them, I'll give you an assessment of like what I saw when I came in and how did I approach implementing the Pragmatic Framework. I don't pretend to be an expert in all things here, so I'm sure that all of you have very good ideas that you could probably done better, but I think it's how I viewed things and how I implemented them. So let's talk about Company A. The situation as I stepped into it, the engineering team had very good agile practices. The team was mostly product owners, so they were very good at writing epics and stories. The roadmap is fairly typical with these type of companies, is that they had a lot of feature-driven roadmap. And the roadmap, how it was prioritized, was whoever screamed the loudest last. So whatever customer was yelling the most got their item, prioritized earlier, and other customers were getting upset. There was a little bit of engagement with customers, but the cab was getting started right as I joined, and there was really no engagement with partners. We had implementation partners that were taking our software and implementing it. There was really no engagement with them. The pricing and packaging and licensing was a tremendously complicated area. We had its own manual, believe it or not, a 30-page document that you had to go read. Our sales team had to go read that and understand that before they could explain things to our customers. And siloed development. And what I mean by this is the marketing team wasn't aware of when the releases were coming out or what was in the releases. Our training team didn't know, would wait until the release came out before they start building training. Which meant that they couldn't really be proactive and be ready for a launch across the whole company. So what did I do here? I think first is aligning on roles and responsibilities across stakeholders. I mentioned that the teams weren't talking to each other. One of the things that happened was there was some dual work happening between the product team and the marketing team. And we wanted to make sure that there's clear accountability and ownership, and we're not doing double work. So we agreed on that with the head of marketing, or I agreed on that with the head of marketing. And we had very clear owners for who owns what, including the pricing pieces. So the way we did that is to take the boxes. You can go to Pragmatic's website and you can download the framework itself as a PowerPoint. And then I just started color coding each of the boxes across the board. The implemented a product line roadmap. Even though we had one product, there were some smaller products that were underneath that. And we wanted to have the dependencies between the sub-products be reflected in our roadmap. So if you are working on some functionality, if you're building out some APIs, that needs to come before you can build the integration to the second product. You've got to be able to show that in the product roadmap. And so we started implementing that. Instituted multiple VOC avenues. I talked about, we had a customer advisory board, but instituted a regular cadence with them. We were meeting with them annually, but we started doing quarterly calls, and then also starting to do regular internal updates to our teams. So quarterly webinars to our partners as well as our internal teams. And finally, implemented AHA to manage our roadmap and metrics. Having that as a single source of truth that integrated directly with Jira Cloud. And it also encouraged a lot of participation from stakeholders. So prior to having AHA, we would have partners emailing product owners with ideas or suggestions or requests or bugs or whatever, and then we would have to track all of them manually in various spreadsheets. And of course, we were using Jira, but not everything was making it into Jira. By implementing AHA, we were able to streamline all of that and allow not our customers, our partners, as well as our internal stakeholders to vote on issues, particularly in the idea side. That helped us a lot in trying to prioritize the right issues and bring them up and understand exactly who to go talk to validate those things. Remember, one of the things that Pragmatic tells you is you got to go and talk to customers to validate that. Well, if you've got a problem that you're trying to solve, one of the big challenges you have, particularly in enterprise software, is that you got to go and validate that. And who better than to go back to the person who asked for it and say, let's talk a little bit more about what do you mean here? What are you trying to solve for? Focusing back on that market problem. And that was really, really important for us. So moving on to the second company. Here, this was a company that grew through acquisitions. The team that I inherited had a mix of product managers and product owners, but there was no methodology in product management because they came through various acquisitions. Each product team was at a different stage of maturity. The roadmaps that I got were Excel extracts from Jira when I first joined, and there was no central roadmap, and there was no engagement with customers either. So there were no formal cabs or anything like that. And then the clear definition of product manager, this comes back to very similar to what I talked about earlier, duplicate work with marketing and sales. And in some cases, sales teams were wanting to control all customer interactions because they didn't trust or they didn't feel that product management could handle customer conversations on their own. So hopefully some of this resonates with people on the call, because I'm sure that you guys have all seen this as well. And the last piece is a lack of product operations. And what I mean by this is when you have a portfolio of products, you're likely going to get asked by your senior management on how do we measure progress. I'll talk a little bit about the metrics, but you really need to invest in product operations to help you drive that, because there's no way that I could have done this on my own. I created a position for product operations, and we put a bunch of things underneath that. Part of that was the AHA management, but getting together product health dashboards that mixed a blend of the financial, the sales results on every quarter, along with the bug, the health of the product itself, any outage information, incidents, security issues, and then product adoption. So we had a Power BI dashboard that we built out to help manage a lot of these things in conjunction with our engineering leadership. And what we did was we instituted quarterly business reviews for product engineering, where product and engineering leadership would present that to our senior leadership, so they had visibility into what was happening from an engineering perspective and technical debt perspective. So implementing Pragmatic here, I talked about establish Pragmatic as the methodology aligned with marketing and sales leadership. We did a big bang approach. I wound up sending a bunch of people to get trained on Pragmatic. There was a lesson learned out of that. I think Pragmatic has a reputation. So as soon as people put the little badge on LinkedIn, I had a wave of attrition in my team. So that's a lesson learned from that. Like this time I'm not doing a big bang. I'm trying to layer it in slowly so that I don't end up having attrition on my team. I think it speaks to the value of having that Pragmatic certification. The second piece that we put in there is implementing initiative maturity process for roadmap. Think of it as a sales funnel. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the takeaways as well. But having monthly reviews with the team and building in customer validation was very, very important. So much like a sales opportunity goes through different stages, we created some stages in AHA so we could say, okay, the initiatives that are coming in start and conceive and go into validate and then into design before it goes into actually building something with engineering. The third piece that I did was delineating between product managers and product owners. And this is really, I feel it's a very important point, because with the prevalence of agile, those two terms, and there's been lots of articles on this topic, and it's an area that I know is constantly evolving. So I'll share my view on it. I don't think there's any right or wrong approach here, but this is how I look at it. And I tell this to my teams all the time. A product manager to me is if they spend 4 days out of 5 working with external facing parties, marketing, sales, RFP responses, analysts, pricing, things like that, they're a product manager. If they spend 4 days out of 5 working with product owners, working with engineering teams, writing epics and stories and having sprint review meetings and so on, that's a product owner. And there's no right or wrong answer. I think it's recognizing that there's a different skill set and the talent that you would need with both these skill sets. And so we had to make some upgrades and adding capacity in some cases. So recognizing that if you have high functioning pods, you need to have strong product owners that can keep those pods fed, if you will. Like you got to have good amount of groomed backlog and getting them going. And if you only have one product manager that's trying to do both jobs, chances are that they're not going to do either one well. Something is going to suffer. So I think you have to take that into account. We established multiple customer advisory boards, started doing a lot of win-loss calls to get more customer validation. And the last one, I think this was really one of the ideas from one of my team was I sponsored a community of practice. So actually the idea came from my team, but I was able to fund it with my budget, a community of practice within the company to help a product owner or product manager ask for help from other team members. So it was run by the team for the team. And so I just stood back and let them go at it. And that was really inspiring to see because you could see that there were some members who were very good at doing pricing and others really struggled with it, and it was good to see that sharing. So think of it as a pack, but just within your company, so you can share confidential information without having to jump through NDAs and all that. Okay, the last one is the situation in the company was we had a lot of subject matter experts, so they were hired for domain knowledge and not necessarily for the product management experience. Again, I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think that you have to have a certain balance. Very similar in the roadmap being extremely feature heavy, with very little thought about what is the market problem that we're trying to solve and what is the customer impact. The company had also just recently started on an agile implementation. Yes, that might sound weird to you, but there's not every software company is doing agile yet, even today. So they were doing agile in name only, but really doing waterfall with sprints. And the company had a history of business units, so there were a lot of little silos that each domain or each product line was doing something on their own and not necessarily sharing best practices. And despite being a cloud company, they were used to be an on-prem company, so everything that they do, their practices, everything still had on-prem mindset. So very much thinking in those terms and not thinking about SaaS and being cloud. So what did I do there? I think it's getting people trained on Pragmatic Framework, developing that maturity model, implementing a standardized initiative process that I talked about earlier. I also invested in an agile coach because this was, like I mentioned, the agile implementation was fairly young and we're trying to build out champions and a center of excellence. Roles and responsibilities and encourage transparency. This is to break down those silos, building a product core team, if you will, and planning some brown bag sessions with the team to hear from others. So I would love to hear if anybody wants to volunteer. I'd love to have you guys as a guest speaker in my company. So with that, I'm going to transition. I talked a lot about metrics. Peter Drucker said this. I think it makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I've found, I've attended various product events over the course of many years. And in general, I think metrics is an area that product management struggles with. Because there's so many things that you could measure, but so many things that you have very little control over. You could say, yeah, you should measure revenue, but product management doesn't control revenue. The sales team controls the revenue. So you have influence over it. So it's all indirect measurement. So I'll share a little bit about my thoughts on metrics. So some KPIs to consider, and this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but if you have a portfolio of products, you should think about win rate and the opportunity win rate. So meaning, how often are you getting at-bats or opportunities, and how often are you winning them? And how often do you get a sales qualified or marketing qualified lead turns into an actual opportunity? Because both of those will indicate to a certain extent what your product market fit is. Compare that to the segment win rate. The third metric is the ARR to R&D spend. That is normally like how you want to look at from a, are you investing enough in your engineering capacity and your product capacity? And do you have referenceable customers? So if you think about your portfolio, not every product is at the same life cycle. You're going to have products that are a little bit long in the tooth. You're going to have products that are newer, that may not have wide adoption. So you've got to think about implementing a framework, if you will, that you can start to say, what should you expect to see in a product that is in early adoption versus a product that's more in the sunset side? Because if you see a product that you potentially want to sunset, you may not sunset right away, but let's say it's 3 or 4 years out, you're going to sunset it. You should see that the win rate's probably going to be starting to go down. The ARR to R&D spend might be stable, or it may even be declining. But you have to also take that into account as you look at where the product is in its life cycle, and can you save that revenue and move it off to a newer product. The second bucket is if you've got a single product that you're managing, obviously bookings and retention. By the way, all of this is for SaaS software, so I'm not really focusing too much on on-prem, but on-prem would be revenue. You should just take the word bookings out and put revenue there. Win-loss call completion. This is one of the things that happens, is that this is an easy area to overlook, but I feel like it's an important area for product management to focus on. There's been some other people on the pack that have potentially outsourced this. I think that's an interesting model to look at. I've always had the opinion that this is something product management should try to do in-house, particularly the loss calls, because it is really important to get that direct feedback and not go through layers, because every time you go through a layer, you lose context. So that's my personal view. Adoption, if you've got systems like Pendo or Mixpanel or any other kind of analytics platform that sits on top of your product, trying to understand what features or what functionality customers are actually using. And it's not just about tracking the monthly active user and daily active user. It's really about going deeper and understanding what does a healthy customer look like, and defining that. Many organizations these days have customer success managers that are dedicated to certain accounts. That adoption information, you should see that as a potential revenue opportunity as well, because if a customer isn't using all the modules that they purchased, it'll show up in that adoption data, and that becomes input for your customer success manager to have a conversation with that customer, maybe potentially sell them more training, or hey, if depending on how your software is set up, maybe they're using a lot of the software and maybe it's an upsell opportunity. So that metric, that adoption metric, is really, really important for a product manager to understand. So the other piece you could look at is innovation and sustainment percentage. And what I mean by this is I broadly categorize between two buckets here. Innovation is any functionality, like new features that you're building, versus sustainment is all bugs, technical debt, everything else. Sustainment is what are you doing to just keep the revenue. Innovation is what are you doing to try to expand that revenue. So broadly speaking, you can start to track that. You can tie that back to where your product is in their life cycle. So a product that is close to end of life or sunset, the sustainment percentage is going to be much higher than innovation. So you might set some metrics around that to manage that. The last two pieces, growth rate versus TAM and SAM. I think this is, are you taking market share? I think that's the question that it's trying to answer. If your TAM and your SAM is growing at, let's say, 5%, and your growth rate is 7%, then you are taking market share from the competition potentially, or you're just capturing new logos that come in. But if it's flipped, if the SAM is growing at 10% and you're growing at 5%, that's not good enough. You're actually losing market share. So even though you're growing, it's not healthy growth, and you should really be looking at it. And margin is exactly what it sounds like. It's how profitable are you? And depending on which company, even if it's a public company, you'd want to look at that to understand, how is your product contributing to the success of the company. The product build metrics, I don't want to go through all of this, but I'll call out a couple of things. One thing I look at is story cycle time. How long does a story take for it to be completed by engineering? So it might sound like it's an engineering metric, but the way I think about it is if a story is well defined, meaning it's written well, engineering understands exactly what to build, the cycle time should be very low, or it should be fairly predictable. Anytime you tend to have a lot of the story that's too big, or it goes back and forth between product owners and the engineering, tells me that the story probably wasn't written well to begin with, or maybe it was too big. It wasn't broken down enough. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm happy to take questions on this because I do want to move on here. How am I doing for time? I think I'm all right. Okay. So takeaways. So I've got, I would say, 3 slides here. So I'll talk a little bit about this. First is when you're implementing Pragmatic, understand the organization. So that's the first piece. I mentioned before, product management is, depending on the organization, it sits in various places. You got to understand, survey the landscape to see, does your organization have clear roles and responsibilities? Understand where your team is at, right? Understand where they are. Like in my case, I had 3 very different experiences with teams. Some of them were very good. Some of them were, good in certain things, but not in others. So you have to understand where they are, meet them where they are, and have patience because it's not an overnight process. Know your customers. This is something that, you hear a lot about, talking to customers, but I think that really depends. Your success with the Pragmatic Framework really depends on how much you can do this, on being customer facing. So it goes back to having clear ideas of what your product market fit is. And if you don't have that product market fit, that should be your first job, to figure out what your product market fit is. Something that can help you there is segmenting. If you say, oh, we have a lot of customers, I would start to segment them into maybe industry category, maybe size of customer, but you've really got to understand what are your segments that you want to focus on, and where do you think the growth is going to come from, because those are the type of customers that you should be focusing on. Just to give you an example, we sell enterprise software. I've been in enterprise software for a long time. I gave you an idea of the type of deal sizes. So I do not focus on customers that are small because that's not my segment that I'm going after. So I tend to focus on the larger customers and making sure that my team spends enough time talking to them. Doesn't mean that there's not a market in the lower end. It's just that if you as a company have decided that's not what you're going to focus on, then there's no point in talking to them. So how you get VOC is directly tied to the type of customers you have. That's what I was just mentioning, like the type of customers you have. You could also say the type of customers you want, because I think both of those go hand in hand. Invest in a product lifecycle framework. I talked about this as well earlier. All products are not equal. One of the things that I see happening over and over again in organizations is they treat every product the same, and the reality is they're not. Some products, they bring in more revenue, they're easier to sell. The sales team is able to sell them. The value prop is much more clearer than others. So just because 2 products they may be in the same, I would say, like how long the version, let's say version 5, right? If you've done 5 versions of it, they may still be in the same time that you started building them, but one of them is probably bringing in more revenue. It's probably easier to sell, et cetera. So you got to think about implementing a product lifecycle framework. There are lots of models out there. I didn't spend a ton of time on this presentation talking about the different models. There's a McKinsey model out there. There's various models that you can take a look at to see what you want to adopt. The key message here is that you should not be treating them all the same. They're not. Product management focus should be directly tied to the product life cycle. So how much, you wouldn't want to invest a ton of VOC on a product that is showing declining growth rates, or you think it's about to go into sunset mode. It just doesn't make sense. You may have a different type of resource there, and there's nothing wrong with that. It still brings in a lot of revenue. So I'm not poo-pooing products that are older in the life cycle. That's what pays the bill. So you still got to pay attention to them. But the balance that you put in will be tied to the product life cycle. My second set of takeaways: treat your roadmap, treat your initiative funnel like a sales funnel. One of the things that I've done is tying the stages to specific outputs that are called out in the Pragmatic Framework. So for example, validate would be tied to win-loss calls that we would look at. Conceive is, market problem is clearly identified. And the validate is like market problem is identified and it's validated as worth solving. So we specifically look for how many customers did we talk to and what type of validation did we get before it can proceed to the next stage. So think of it as a very much like a depending on your org's maturity. I'm sure you guys have a sales funnel and there's an opportunity stage, and the sales organization usually has very good guidelines of how can you go from stage 4 to stage 5 and so on. And you have to think about defining something similar for your roadmap as well. Invest in product operations, particularly if you have a portfolio, if you have multiple products, most likely your data will come from disparate sources. So you will need some help in building out dashboards that help everybody. So depending on how your organization is set up, your sales and revenue information could come from Salesforce, your bug information could come from Jira or whatever tool you're using. And your outage information could come from StatusHub or whatever. So there's always going to be disparate sources. So if you've got a portfolio of products, you almost have to invest in a product operations person because they're going to help you bring all that together. And I'm speaking that sentence is more about like me being a leader. That's one thing I got to do. Consider joint product and engineering QBRs, quarterly business reviews. This is something that I feel particularly passionate about. Been very fortunate in having very strong engineering leaders as my counterpart on the other side. And having this kind of a joint QBR really encourages joint ownership and accountability between the teams. And it also provides visibility to stakeholders. So these engineering QBRs, I invite other people too. I invite services, I invite marketing to it. But really, my primary goal is to drive alignment between product and engineering. One of the things that I've learned is if there's any hint of daylight between product and engineering, the other functions are going to take advantage of that. And I don't mean that as a negative. I just think that if there's any gap there, you start to, it's like water going into a crack, right? As more water goes in, it starts to expand. And you don't want that. You want to try to seal that up as quickly as possible. All right. Here's my Star Wars homage. Patience you will need, because like I mentioned, I keep saying this again and again, maturing product management team takes time. Pick 2 or 3 areas that you want to focus on because you don't want to boil the ocean. You want to focus on a couple of 3 areas, and that depends on where you are in your product, what the challenges are that you're facing, and you've got to focus on those areas. The second point here is you can't put out every fire. There will be things that you have to prioritize, and you got to let some things burn. Because I see it as almost like a controlled burn. Let it burn because you don't have the bandwidth or the mental capacity to go after every single thing. I mentioned picking the top 2 or 3 areas that you want to focus on. There may be other things. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I've seen in organizations is that the training, the handover between product and sales engineering or your demo people or your if you build your own training, that is usually something that's almost always broken. And that's something that you may not want to focus on right away, because you may need to fix some upfront things before you can get to that. And those things, you may let them burn for a little while before you pay attention to it. And then the last takeaway that I have for you guys is training is the first step, not the last. So as much as I love Pragmatic and the framework and attending the training classes, you cannot assume that just by sending people to training and attending a training class, they suddenly become experts in it. They will only learn by doing, and they will make mistakes. Don't be afraid to experiment and tweak. I've certainly done that. To use a phrasing here, you got to be pragmatic about your implementation of Pragmatic, and really be receptive, like meet your team where it is and understand where your company's at, and so on. So with that, that's the end of my scheduled slides. I'm happy to take any questions. Let me see if I can.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. There are lots and lots of questions for you. People really curious with kind of what your secret sauce is. So I'm going to pull a couple of them and pose them to you. While we are working through questions for folks on the call, we have a really quick poll for you guys about about this session itself. So we'll put that up for you. If you could respond to that, that would be fantastic. Pat, the first question is about Company B. So in Company B, you identified that one of the challenges was that sales wanted to control all of the customer interactions. So this person is looking for, how did you overcome that more specifically? Were there any particular tactics that worked really well for you?
Yeah, so one of the things in that example was understanding why they were trying to do this. And I had conversations with the individual sales representatives. Some of them were very old school. They felt that product is part of the factory. Why do you guys need to talk to customers? But I also went to their leadership and explained that to them. One of them pointed out that one of the individuals on my team didn't have strong communication skills. So we addressed that by saying, okay, you, Mr. Sales Guy, can join the meeting, but the expectation is that you will stay quiet and you're listening in, and you will only jump in if you think that the conversation is horribly getting derailed. So it does come with setting expectations with the sales leadership, and hopefully you've got a good partner there. I think it goes without saying that you got to have alignment at the top for that to work.
Yeah, makes sense. There's one that I think is really an interesting question, because you mentioned early on the importance of product operations on a team. Can you dive into your definition of product operations a little bit more? Someone's asking if it's similar to a business analyst, and I know that not every org has the luxury of a product ops person.
Yeah. So again, I don't think it's like an industry-wide definition, but I'll share with you what my product operations person is. I don't see it as a business analyst, because a business analyst to me is kind of like a product owner. So what I'm defining as product operations is somebody who's going to help the product manager or the product management leadership make sure that there's consistency and quality control in the mechanics of how we're doing things. So example, so if you've got, let's say you have a portfolio of 3 products, and depending on your organization, that might be 3 product managers, it might be 30 product managers. But understanding, starting to put together dashboards across these organizations so that they're consistent. So if I ask for what is the product health of product A, I don't want to see 3 different dashboards. I want to see one dashboard that has different data for the 3 products. So this product operations person, depending on your org, could be a junior person who's good at data, building dashboards, either like using Tableau or Power BI or any of the other visualization areas, or it could just be Jira if you just want to do it right in Jira, depending on where your data sources are. Or it could be a little bit more senior level and have more functions reporting to them than what they are today. So the way I've got it right now is I've got a product operations person that not only helps me build out these dashboards, but they're also managing other people, establishing quality control in our agile practices, making sure that that is happening effectively, the grooming meetings are happening effectively, and making sure that we've got a healthy groomed backlog across the various pods, across all the various products. Having consistency in measuring it, that's what I'm seeing as product operations. I'm happy to talk more about it because I do feel that is something that I totally acknowledge that it's something that I made up because I needed that person in my org.
Yep. I feel like that's where all the best roles are born out of, though, right?
Yeah. It's a problem, like it's a market problem to solve.
It's a market problem to solve, indeed. I've got a couple questions here for you about your QBRs. So the first one is looking for like an example agenda of your product and engineering QBR. And then the second question is asking similar, how does a QBR work in an engineering context? And is it like your typical business review, or did you adjust your content to include more development metrics, et cetera?
Yeah, so we had a few different things, right? So the product management team would typically start it off, and they would give a one-slide view of what are the quarterly highlights and lowlights. And usually that was more business focused. Did we have any key wins in that quarter? Did we have any key losses? What does the opportunity pipeline look like? What was our quarterly attainment against what was the target for the company, for the sales organization? That is really important because I think engineering never gets invited, or at least I have seen, like they don't get invited to the sales QBRs, but sometimes product management does, depending on the org, or I ask them to invite product management. So product management should have visibility on how's your product doing as a business, right? So you got to have that. So I want engineering to be aware that, hey, there is, this is how much was our quarter, like your budget was $1 million and we closed at 900K for the quarter, or we closed at 1.2 million, whatever that number is, you have to show how you're doing against it. Also, it helps explain or helps provide visibility to the engineering leadership on some of the implications and decisions that they might make. So if they decide to delay something by a week or 2 weeks, and that has a downstream impact on a customer, that could have direct revenue recognition impact that is going to hit our quarter or hit our year. So that provides that visibility. So my first slide was really a business focused slide. Think of it as you could lift it straight out of the sales presentation, but usually product management built that. The second slide was really a product health dashboard. And there we looked at overall, how are we doing as a product? Like, so what is our upcoming release? Are we on schedule or are we not? That's usually some kind of a burn down chart. Or you could look if you can. We typically don't spend sprint level data on a quarterly business review, so it's more of a release. The next thing we look at is what is your bug backlog look like? What's your aging look like? How many open Sev 1s or Sev 2s you got? And when was the last security scan? Usually there's like some kind of, you guys, I'm sure you're doing security scans, and almost always they find something and you have to address them. So there's things that you'd want to see there. And you also want to see like a 6-month rolling average of your support cases, right? Are you starting to see more support cases? Any kind of data, like I mentioned, Pendo data, like I want to see adoption data in there. So that's another, I would say, it's overall health of the product, and then you get into the engineering metrics. So those would be typically agenda. So typically we would spend 45 minutes to an hour on each product, sometimes a little bit more than that. Usually there was a lot of actions that are coming out of it because we found that, hey, some trend line isn't looking very good. What's going on? Like, let's try to dig into that and understand why did we have so many incidents of downtime or unexplained performance hits or something like that. and we may need to go get other people involved in that conversation. So, but that's a typical agenda.
That's awesome. Really helpful. I can like hear the scratching of people taking notes virtually right now. I've got another one that there have been many questions about, and I know this can be a really big topic, so you can choose to answer it in as much depth or not as you feel. How did you manage your delineation of product managers and product owners, especially on a team where you've got people that have one title, but maybe they're operating as the other? How did you create that delineation? Did you have levels? What kind of challenge?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I tried to emphasize is that there is no, it's not like, oh, you become a product owner and then you get promoted to a product manager. I think that both those functions are super critical, and it's a different skill set. Somebody who is very detail oriented could be doing great as a product owner, but if they try to produce slides for a customer facing interview that is 12-point font on a slide deck that customers have to sit there and read, they're not very effective communicators. So you do have to look at the skill set of the individual involved to see where do they fit. And there's going to be some people who can do both. So I try not to put a Chinese wall between product managers and product owners. And like I said, I basically look at what do they do in their jobs today. 4 days out of a week, they're focused on supporting the pod and writing epics and stories. Then they're really functioning as a product owner. Now they may want to become a product manager. That's a career discussion that you can have with them. But to be an effective product manager, you've got to you have to have very strong communication skills. You have to know how to do competitive analysis. You may need to do pricing. You may need to be articulate in talking to an analyst. If you have analysts that are covering your segment, you need to be able to do all of those. And that's maybe not their skill set. That doesn't mean that they can't get there. But one of the things I try to say is that you shouldn't see this as a career path. It's really about where do you want to be. There's people that I've worked with in my past company and that are really good product owners that enjoy their job. And I've worked with HR to create a principal product owner type title for them because they could care less about doing pricing and things like that. That's not what they want to do. And that's perfectly fine because there is a room for very senior product owners who can get into the weeds and help define that out. I think so. The key message that I would say is try not to make it into an either or conversation. It's really about, what is your skill set? Where do you want to be? Where are you today and where do you want to be? I think that's the way to think about that.
Yeah, makes sense. Last question for you. Can you speak a little bit more about the closeness of product and development and maybe even give some examples of the water pouring into the cracks? Very vivid analogy.
Yeah. Look, I think that is super important because one of the things that, I've been fortunate to have very strong engineering leaders as partners with me. But what ends up happening is if you don't have that good alignment, there tends to be finger pointing because engineering will say product didn't give me the requirements in time, or they're not writing good stories. And product will say, we're not getting the right product out from engineering. Like we're never getting what we asked for. We asked for I don't want to use an analogy here, but you ask for a Ford and they're trying to design a Ferrari. And you get that analogy a lot, like you're asking for something. So it's really important that you get strong alignment at the top. And one of the things that I try to do is make sure that the goals for the two teams are well aligned. So what they're measured on, the engineering leadership needs to understand what's the commercial prerogative so that they're not just focused on bugs and getting quality releases out. Yes, that's important. But if you get a release out that doesn't address functional requirements that the product team is asking for, that means we won't be able to sell the software, and that directly impacts revenue. So it's really important, at least at the high level, that you've got good alignment in in the goals that people are measured on, and to have the right type of. So I always encourage like the collaboration between product and engineering, and if you have a lot of friction there, I would say that it's probably you should take a very close look at what is causing that and maybe change the people out, because if there is friction there, unless you can work it out, it's never going to be successful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pat. There are a number of other questions for you, but I am keeping an eye on the time as not to be too greedy and monopolizing your day. So I encourage folks, come on into the pack and ask any additional questions to Pat there. As I mentioned, he is a founding member of the pack. If you're not a member of the pack yet, but you are a Pragmatic alumni, send me an email, community@pragmaticinstitute.com, and we will be happy to take care of you there. Again, folks, we have been chatting with Pat Janaka Nandhini, who is the Chief Product Officer at Eris Global. And I really encourage you to reach out to him and stay connected with him in the pack or on LinkedIn or any other social. Pat, thank you so much for chatting with us today. This has been really, really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Georgina. Really happy to do it.
Yeah. Quick shout out for folks if you're interested. Pragmatic has a new course, which is a rare occurrence for us. So this is a certification level course all about design. So where product managers and product marketers can work in a really streamlined way with their design team. So no water pouring into those cracks there. And then on the next slide, I'll give you a quick shout out of our next product chat. 2 Tuesdays from now, we'll be talking with Francisco Bram, who's the head of global product at Uber Eats. And so he's going to be talking about future-proofing your product. So look forward to seeing you all there. Look forward to seeing you all in the pack, hanging out with us and chatting with Pat. And once again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Happy to answer any other questions. I'll be on the community as well, so happy to answer questions there. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, you got it. All right, folks, until next time, it's been a joy chatting with you. Thanks for all your great questions.